The mayor's grand promise of free buses in New York City crashed and burned the second actual numbers hit the table. This isn't some shocking surprise, though, because we've watched this exact same movie play out dozens of times across different cities and different leaders. Whenever some politician stands up and declares that something massive will suddenly become completely free, people naturally get pumped up and excited at first. Their hearts race with possibility and hope for easier lives. But then reality shows up uninvited. The real costs get exposed, and the entire fantasy crumbles like a house of cards in a windstorm. Trump spotted the fatal flaws in this scheme long before anyone else did. And that's because he genuinely understands how money works, how budgets function, and how massive city systems actually operate in the real world rather than in political fantasies. That's precisely why New York exploded with reactions so incredibly fast after his blunt comment. His words ripped away the curtain and exposed the flimsy, unstable foundation that was holding up this ridiculous idea. The first gigantic problem with the mayor's bus plan is actually shockingly simple when you break it down. New York's entire bus system already operates in the red without enough funding to keep things running smoothly. The fleet consists of ancient, deteriorating buses that break down constantly, routes that haven't been updated in decades, and repair backlogs stretching into infinity. The system desperately needs billions upon billions just to maintain basic normal operations and prevent complete collapse. So when somebody suddenly jumps up and cheerfully announces that all fares should vanish into thin air, the financial hemorrhaging becomes absolutely catastrophic and unsustainable. Transportation experts crunch the actual numbers, and now they're saying this brilliant plan would cost somewhere between $700 and $800 million every single year just to stay afloat. That's not pocket change or loose bills you find in your couch cushions. That's not something a mayor can conjure up out of nowhere simply because the proposal sounds warm and fuzzy and makes people feel good inside. This represents the fundamental truth that gets ignored repeatedly. A transportation system doesn't give a damn about your feelings or good intentions. It only cares about cold, hard numbers, about balanced budgets, about the iron laws of supply, meeting demand without breaking. Trump laid out the brutal basic truth without sugarcoating anything. He flat out said the city cannot survive and thrive on pretty dreams and wishful thinking. He explained that the mathematics simply doesn't allow for this radical change without devastating consequences. And Trump hit the nail directly on the head with perfect accuracy. History provides crystal clear evidence that cities which eliminate huge revenue streams without having a solid backup plan inevitably end up slashing other critical services across the board. They butcher safety programs, they abandon crucial repairs, they fire workers in massive waves. Everything grinds slower and slower. Everything becomes weaker and more fragile until the whole system teeters on the edge. We witnessed this exact nightmare back in 1972 when New York City nearly declared bankruptcy because leaders completely ignored financial costs and lived in denial. The swift reaction from the MTA leadership proved this point beyond any shadow of doubt. Their chief, Janno Lieber, came right out and stated that the mayor's idea contained no clear, detailed plan whatsoever. He said the proposal was severely underdeveloped and half-baked. That's the diplomatic, polite version of saying the plan was nowhere near ready for implementation in real life with real money and real consequences. And that's exactly why regular people throughout New York started feeling deeply uneasy and suspicious. They watched a leader make an absolutely massive promise without bothering to show the actual numbers or explain where the money would materialize from. That's why everyone began saying the idea collapsed under scrutiny. It didn't fail because of partisan politics or personal attacks. It failed because mathematical reality always defeats fantasy eventually every single time without exception. Another critically important element of this whole messy story involves the sharp reaction from Governor Kathy Hochul. She came out publicly and declared that the bus system still absolutely needs fair money to function properly. That single devastating line completely destroyed the entire core message behind the mayor's flashy proposal. When the governor, the transportation experts, and the president all stand together saying the exact same thing simultaneously, the idea loses all credibility at lightning speed. This perfectly demonstrates how weak ideas shatter into pieces under real pressure. They break apart when somebody with genuine experience pushes back hard using facts instead of emotions and feelings. Trump understands New York City on a much deeper and more intimate level than the mayor ever could. He constructed massive buildings throughout that city for decades. He personally handled tough union negotiations, dealt with endless permits, managed construction delays, wrestled with tight budgets, and survived brutal inspections. He knows exactly how the city responds and reacts when money suddenly dries up and disappears. That's why his message carried such tremendous weight and authority. He warned clearly that the city desperately needs stability and predictability, not wild fantasy and reckless experimentation. He said that irresponsible ideas always hurt the working class first and hardest, and he's absolutely correct about that harsh reality. When transit systems lose money and go broke, it's always the poor neighborhoods that experience painfully slow buses, completely broken stations, and ridiculously long waits in terrible conditions. So, ironically, a free bus plan actually harms and damages the very people it supposedly claims to help and protect. The most fascinating part of this entire saga involves how the mayor started rapidly changing his words and backtracking. Before all the pressure hit, he boldly said the plan was a full, comprehensive program ready to launch. After intense criticism mounted, he suddenly claimed it was merely a pilot project, just a small test, a distant future vision that might happen someday. That dramatic shift reveals that the idea lacked strength and substance from the very beginning. Strong ideas with solid foundations don't magically change shape when challenged. Only weak ideas morph and transform desperately. This shows that language always changes and shifts when leaders frantically try to hide obvious flaws and problems, and voters can absolutely see through this transparent trick. They can sense instantly when something feels dishonest and manipulative. The people of New York reacted with anger because they felt deliberately misled and deceived. They want better, cleaner, more reliable buses, absolutely, but they want honest truth even more desperately. They want a genuine funding plan with real numbers, not a shallow campaign slogan designed to win votes. That's why this mushroomed into such a huge controversial issue overnight. New Yorkers know their city costs a fortune to run. They know deep down that nothing in life is truly free without somebody paying somewhere, so when they finally saw the massive hidden costs lurking beneath the surface, they instantly felt the plan wasn't serious or legitimate. Trump's powerful response created even more intense pressure because he zeroed in on federal funding dependencies. New York relies heavily on Washington for countless essential things: security support, emergency disaster money, housing assistance programs, and critical transport funds all flow from federal sources. If a mayor recklessly pushes a gigantic idea without any coherent plan or funding source, the federal government will naturally question everything and potentially pull support. Trump simply spoke out loud what many federal officials were already thinking privately. And once he said it publicly for everyone to hear, every weak, vulnerable part of the plan suddenly showed up in bright light. This serves as definitive proof of a much deeper systemic problem plaguing governance. Many Democratic leaders habitually start with pure emotion and feeling. They genuinely believe that good intentions alone are enough to succeed. But cities need strict logic and discipline, not just hope and dreams. They need detailed budgets, realistic timelines, and solid backup plans for when things go wrong. When Democrats ignore these basics and skip the hard work, their flashy ideas inevitably fall apart. That's why so many big American cities today struggle with crime, homelessness, and decay. They lead with feelings instead of structure and accountability. The bus idea failed spectacularly because it tried to skip the hardest part completely. It tried to ignore and bypass the math entirely. And history teaches us that skipping the difficult part always leads straight to failure. Trump understands that fundamental truth instinctively. He may speak in a simple, direct way without flowery language, but his instincts on cost and risk prove correct remarkably often. He recognizes a bad plan immediately when he sees one New York already faces crushing high costs, rapidly rising needs, and extremely tight budgets with no room to breathe. Adding another massive bill with absolutely no funding source isn't leadership at all. It's reckless and dangerous behavior. And New Yorkers sensed this truth immediately. That's why the topic exploded across social media. That's why the entire city reacted so loudly and forcefully. People understood that the plan didn't match reality in any meaningful way. Trump's one blunt statement accomplished what the whole city government couldn't do. It forced the uncomfortable truth out into the open where everyone could see it. It made people actually look at the numbers instead of the feelings. It made the mayor defend something he couldn't possibly explain with facts. And in the brutal world of politics, that's exactly how weak ideas die painful deaths. This is why the city erupted in controversy. This is why the plan broke apart. And this is why Trump's voice had such devastating impact. Weak ideas fail because they stand on hope instead of facts. And this free bus fantasy now serves as a perfect textbook example of why cities must respect costs before making grand promises. This represents a completely predictable collapse because it follows the identical pattern we've witnessed in many cities over many decades. When leaders push ideas without numbers, the ideas shatter the moment someone asks for the bill. The first thing people noticed after the plan fell apart was genuine fear spreading inside city agencies. Workers instantly understood that eliminating bus fares without securing new money would mean brutal cuts in other places. In simple words, if you stop one income source, you must stop one service somewhere. That's just common sense. Trump pointed out this basic truth, and that alone created more clarity than the entire city government managed. This demonstrates how powerful common sense leadership becomes when the political system gets confused and lost. New Yorkers reacted so strongly because they sensed something much deeper happening. They saw a mayor who promised a huge idea but couldn't explain its cost honestly. People trust leaders who speak honestly about limits and constraints. When leaders pretend there are no limits whatsoever, people lose faith incredibly fast. And that's exactly what happened here. The moment people saw hundreds of millions missing from the budget, they realized the plan was never real. It was a message, not a model. Trump's warning made the problem clearer. He said, "You cannot run a huge complex city with feel-good ideas that don't match the budget reality." And history strongly supports this view. When San Francisco, Detroit, and Chicago tried similar free programs without proper funding, their systems broke, services deteriorated, delays grew longer, and people fled the cities, and wave cities declined rapidly when leaders let emotion replace math, and the mayor fell into that trap completely. Another important point involves how Democratic leaders typically react when facts appear. Instead of fixing the numbers, honestly, they change the message desperately. The mayor did exactly the same thing. He shifted the name of the plan repeatedly. First, it was a full comprehensive plan. Then it magically became a pilot program, then a vision for the future. When words move this fast, it means the idea never had strong roots. Honest ideas don't need new names to survive criticism. Only weak ideas need constant rewriting. Trump's stance on this issue remains simple and consistent. You cannot break a working system by removing its funding. And you cannot protect the poor by weakening the service they rely on most. This is what many people forget. When buses lose money, they don't improve in wealthy areas. They get worse in poor areas. And that's why Trump warned so early. He has seen how cities fall when leaders ignore basic financial discipline. The most serious part of this issue involves how trust got damaged. Once people see one idea fall apart, they begin questioning everything else. They wonder if the next big promise also hides the truth. This slows down leadership. Every agency becomes careful. Every worker waits for clear instructions, and every voter becomes harder to convince. This is the cost of unrealistic politics. The damage continues long after the idea dies. Another thing that made this moment big was the governor's reaction when Kathy Hochul said the transit system still needs fair money. She exposed the gap without even attacking him. That's the power of facts. You don't need to argue. You just state the truth. And the truth here was simple. The money doesn't exist. Trump's warning and the governor's statement together made the public see the full picture. New York cannot run on experiments. It's too big. It moves too fast and carries too much responsibility. Big systems break when leaders force ideas that ignore structure. The free bus idea ignored structure completely. It forgot cost, it forgot supply, it forgot long-term repair needs, it even forgot transit workers must be paid. A city cannot forget these things. And Trump's comment reminded everyone This event will affect city politics for a long time. The mayor will have a harder time pushing new ideas. People will demand numbers before they clap. Reporters will ask tougher questions. Agencies will push back. This happens when trust drops early, and this is why responsible leadership matters so much in the first year. Mistakes made early are very hard to undo. Early, Trump came out looking stronger because he spoke truth before the system broke. And when truth finally showed, people saw he was right. This is why his voice still influences national debates. He doesn't need fancy words. He doesn't need long speeches. He only needs to point at facts everyone else avoids. And facts have more power than slogans. The fall of this plan warns every city. It shows leaders must respect math. They must respect costs. They must respect structure. Great nations and cities fall apart when leaders ignore these basics. And history shows this again and again. The free bus idea is just another example of a city trying to skip the hard part. What happens next depends on whether New York chooses realism or fantasy. If it chooses realism, it will demand real funding plans. If it chooses fantasy, it will see more broken ideas. Trump's message pushed the city toward realism. The mayor's message pushed it toward fantasy. And people now must decide which path they want. At the end of the day, this issue was never about buses. It was about truth. It was about honesty. It was about respecting the limits that keep cities alive. The free bus idea didn't fall because Trump attacked it. It fell because reality exposed it. And when reality speaks, politics must